Hey folks, my name is Adam Anderson, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the behavioral psychology in the Fortune 500, changing habits to protect your organization from cyber criminality. And I know this sounds like a cyber awareness talk, but we're going to be talking about high-level C-suite brains. So let's jump into this. So why should you listen to me? Well, I'm ruggedly handsome. I do quote my sources, and this one is from my wife. Your mileage may vary, but she's happy with it. Second, I am the scholar in residence for cybersecurity research at Clemson University's Center for Corporate Learning. This is a fancy way for me to say buy my books. They're fantastic Christmas gifts or holiday gifts, whatever you'd like. Unfortunately, they're not that great compared to my wife's book, In Bed with the Business, The Entrepreneurial Spouse's Survival Guide. She outsold me in one day. Turns out more people are interested in marriage than cybersecurity. Speaking of cybersecurity, I've been in it for 20 years. Back in the 90s, well, we really didn't call it cybersecurity. I've done about 13 years as an entrepreneur. I've got 15 businesses as either the founder or the prime investor. I have failed companies. I like to call these nonprofits. And I've had one successful exit. So now what I'm doing is going around and doing a lot of speaking and talking about my experiences. I'm also the current fractional chief security officer for 3 startups and adjunct security advisors for mergers and acquisitions. So that's who I am, and if you think this person might have some wisdom, then great. If not, just be polite and clap along. Okay, cybersecurity, right? That's what most people's reactions are, and it's terrifying. I understand it. Cybersecurity can be really scary, but it's nothing compared to a cross-country road trip with children. See, it was the 80s, and my father decided we were going to drive across the entire United States, and that's going to take a while. And this was before we had the internet, our cell phones. So he had to call ahead, book appointments in hotel rooms, and in general, build himself a very complex schedule. And because he was a military man, we were going to stick to that schedule. There was one major risk to that schedule, and that was unplanned bathroom breaks by his 2 boys. He mitigated that risk by training us with a new skill set, how to urinate into a Pepsi can. So by day 3, we had mastered our craft. And it was at one such occasion when I needed to answer nature's call that I reached forward and I grabbed a Pepsi can. But there was something different about this can. You see, it was cold, and my little 6-year-old brain at the time didn't really register the significance of that. So again, I answered nature's call, and I put the Pepsi can back from where I found it. About 5 minutes later, my father let off a stream of curse words, so foul and potent that I use them on my kids today. So who's at fault here? The adorable 6-year-old? Yes, I did indeed pee into my father's Pepsi can, but he also owns a lot of the responsibility. You see, he had the incorrect belief about his risk. The threat landscape had changed, but he didn't change his behavior. He didn't change how he approached the world. So we can learn a lot from my dad and his experience when we're talking to executives and boards of directors. So let's look at this. Belief leads to emotion. Emotion leads to your behavior, and behavior over time develops habits. Now, you and your executive staff have a bunch of habits, and we have tried to modify those habits for years, and that just doesn't work. You cannot do behavioral modification because we know that that just doesn't work. Because you start a diet, you think you're going to do the thing, and then at the end of the day, 3 months later, you're right back to the old behaviors. So what's going on here is that if you don't change the belief at the core of the behavior, the negative habits will return. So here are some of the negative beliefs that your executives have. Number 1, security slows down my projects. And by the way, security is absolutely going to kill my budget. I'm already barely coming in under budget, and if I add this, we're gone. And By the way, security doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, so it can't advise me effectively. And they're just going to make things more complicated and give me a lot of stuff I don't even need. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Does anybody not get involved in a project until the end because they think they can sneak it through? Right. Well, I got a lot of value by talking to Dr. Rich Ruth. He wrote a fantastic book about the power of role and about how to manage up as an information technologist into the C-suite. And we're going to be going over some of the lessons I've got from him today. Number one, the number one risk to cybersecurity in the world is the nerd's inability to write a business case that resonates with the C-suite. This gentleman or lady does not have the ability to understand how business works, doesn't understand what's going on, but does really understand technology and thinks that understanding technology is going to be enough to convince someone to do something. It just doesn't have the context. So we're going to go over a few things here. The business model that this poor guy is missing is revenue minus expense equals profit. And this business model runs because we've created business systems that cybersecurity and information technology ensure happen. So, who's driving the company? Who's making these systems happen? And these are your executives, and each one is over something. You have your board of directors that hire the CEO. You have the CEO, him or herself, the CFO, the COO, the CMO, and the list goes on and on and on until we get to CXO. My favorite is CVO, Chief Vision Officer. That sounds like a guy who writes a lot of books and speaks at events. By the way, that's also my personal favorite title for myself. So it's not quite that simple though, right? We only have revenue minus expense equals profit, but we have a whole lot of C-level people. And that's because today's business model isn't like it used to be. Because it's not just what's happening in those three steps, it's also when they're happening. So you have tactical revenue, that's between now and 6 months. Then you have strategic revenue, expense, and profit. And that's what's going to happen a couple quarters down the way, or maybe a couple years down the way. And maybe the most foggy is perceived. How do people think we're doing? And there's a different C-level in charge of each one of these. And I'm going to go through what these C-levels are thinking, why they are acting, and if you're talking to one of them, what kind of words you should use. So the VP of Sales is only interested in generating revenue now. Closing now this quarter. I'm sure none of you have had a pushy salesperson come to you and be like, I got to close something this quarter. Come on, help me out, right? Because the VP of Sales has said, we're going to make this much money. And the COO is spending money based on the fact that the VP of Sales said they were going to make that money. So the COO is spending money to make the product happen, to make the service happen, to make the company run, all those systems, right? The COO is owning that. And the CFO is helping them out, because the CFO is going to set revenue goals with the VP of Sales, called a quota, and then assign spending limits to the COO, called budgets. So the CFO uses quotas and budgets to create tactical profit. Well, if we go down to the strategic point of view, we have the CMO now. This is the Chief Marketing Officer. The Chief Marketing Officer is thinking about future revenue. How do I grab market share? So when you're talking to the Chief Revenue Officer or the Chief Marketing Officer in this case, you use words like market share and growth, right? There's also the COO stepping into expense. So it seems pretty logical that when you're speaking to the COO about anything from cybersecurity, you want to say something along the lines of this will help lower expenses, or this will help increase quality. You talk about the product and what it takes to create the product. And then we get to the CFO on this level. The strategic CFO still has quotas and budgets that they're using to control that profit margin. We're going to make sure you don't spend too much, and we're going to make sure we make more, because they need to take that message back to the CEO. The CEO is handling perception. Perception in two key ways. Three actually. To the board of directors. The board of directors who hired the CEO to do something, which is to produce value for shareholders. So also perception to shareholders, and also perception to markets. So the CEO has to take everything that the other C levels are doing and package it in such a way that the perception is that the company is doing very well. So we're missing somebody here, the CIO. So the CIO comes in and tries to align information technology with the rest of the C-suite. And depending on the kind of company you're running and depending on the CIO, this happens in various ways. So this does not talk about the CSO. So what's the role of the cybersecurity chief officer? Well, let's not answer this yet. Let's continue our journey. Let's talk about how a CIO can typically win budget for the chief security officer. The first word is compliance. Has anyone ever heard of compliance? Yes? Fantastic. Compliance and fear. Man, if we can scare them about risk, that's fantastic. But here's the problem. Fear, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, eventually causes the audience to get numb. Be scared all the time, and eventually you no longer care and you no longer believe. And compliance, well, that gets us a lot of movement, but it doesn't actually give us effective security. So we typically get short-term gains with compliance and fear, and we sacrifice long-term results. So great. If we know that's not the trick, how do we modify the beliefs of that C-suite and the people who report to them? Because remember, everybody in that C-suite has people reporting to them that are aligned with their mission. So if you're dealing with directors or managers or the frontline workers, they're still following the same mission of that particular grid that we talked about. Well, here's the bad news. You can't change people's beliefs by force. You can try to change their behaviors by force, but we talked about this, and behavior modification doesn't last. So that leaves us with addressing those key beliefs to move from a compliance mindset to a commitment mindset. Let's review. This is what they're thinking. We slow them down, we spend money, and we don't know what they're doing. Okay? How do we change beliefs for these guys to move away from that position? Got bad news. You got to change yourself before you can change the world. You have to decide that I need to change how I approach these folks, and then they will change how they respond to me. So I want everyone to stand up. Go ahead, stand up. Fantastic. Turn to the person on your to the side of you and say, "You're the problem." Good. Now turn to the person you liked least than the person who you just talked to and say, no, I'm the problem, right? Okay, great. Sit down. Here we go. If you're the problem, what are you going to do about it? Very simple. 3 things are going to change. You're going to understand your target. You're going to change your role in this conversation, and you're going to change the words that you use. We're coming close to the end, guys. The punchline is coming. So, the target. How do you know your target? Well, it really depends on what your CIO is doing. If your CIO reports to the CFO, then that means your organization looks at IT as a cost center that must be controlled. And you're probably not going to have a whole lot of luck launching flowery, awesome kinds of earth-shaking initiatives, and you're really going to need to align with how the company is doing its thing. You're going to need to use words that are related to that. Second is, does your CIO report to the CEO? If that is true, then the CIO is considered a valued member of the C-suite, and the C-suite will then have a lot of faith in them, and you have growth and value potential. They look at IT as somebody who can produce a lot of value and should be leveraged. And honestly, it goes on and on and on, but you figure out who the CIO reports to, what CXO is the direct line manager, and you then can understand pretty sure where the organization thinks IT is. You don't have control over the target. You need to work with your CIO and find out what that target is. Second is your role. Nobody likes when we come in and tell them what to do. When we come in and we try to save the world and we try to tell them we are the owners of the risk. We are the people who make all this stuff happen, and we got to force it, and we got to save the company. Look, when you go in to try to save the company, and the VP of sales is where they're not going to make money, they don't care if they're going to get hacked if they don't make sales, because the whole company is going to go out of business, right? Each one of these C-suite members, if they don't execute their job at the top of their ability, the company fails, with or without cybersecurity. So your role is not to come in and enforce cybersecurity on them and make a fight. Your role is to come in and advise them. Your role is to be Yoda, not Luke. You are not the hero of this story in the company. You are the wise advisor who educates them on risk. And by the way, once you do that, you begin to be invited in. So how do you get invited into conversations? And you can know you're not invited in if at the holiday party, nobody's talking to you. You know, all the cyber guys are in the corner, very, very sad, probably legal as well. Not a lot of people like to talk to legal and the compliance people. But you want to be invited in. And the way you do that is you have to remove fear and change your roles. So what are the words that we have been talking about? We've talked about risk. We all know about risk. Risk is very important. Risk is what is going to derail the company, right? We've talked about compliance. There are just certain rules that have to be followed. There's certain guidelines that have to be in place, or we can't do business, right? And we've also talked about the fact that if the business doesn't function, none of the other stuff matters. Who cares if you're compliant if you don't actually make sales and produce your product? So here are the words that we're going to do. Right now, cyber folks feel like we own risk. If we don't deploy that product, they're going to be able to get in, and don't they understand? Well, here's the thing, they don't understand because you're not advising them. You need to move from owning risk to advising the line of business of the risk and letting them own it. You let them know what's going to happen if something doesn't go, and then they get to decide. Good news, you're no longer on the hook. They are now responsible if they end up in the news, not you. Second, we tend to enforce compliance. We get that thing. We're like, yes, we have to do this. We absolutely have to make this happen. Otherwise, the company is at risk. Oh, wait, you're right. The company is at risk. But guess what? You don't own risk. So you don't have to enforce compliance. You can align compliance with the advice you give about risk. Compliance is a tool and a data point inside of the information you give back to the line of business. All right. Second, we get to the line of business. We inflict security on the line of business. We are a burden to them. But the thing is, security is not something that someone has to do because it's a bad thing. Look, we are the security controls that guarantee a business system that's been put into place actually functions. We enable business. Good security means you have healthy business processes that are repeatable and measurable, and we can apply technology to those business processes to make sure that we know they happened. Security isn't something that stops business. Good security is a byproduct of good business. So, we've talked a lot about this, and we've talked about how belief has to change in the C-suite. And in order to change that belief, you have to change yourself. And the way you have to change yourself is by changing your target, your words, and the role that you assume. And if you can do all these things, and if you can land to where you're a healthy advisor and you're Yoda, not Luke, it's my hope that you'll be able to avoid the horrible, horrible consequences of your actions. Thank you very much.